My dorm has rules that no one told me about, rules that could possibly end a life. Moving to a new country is always terrifying. There's so many things that you have to look into, from visa approvals to places to stay, payments, and budgeting. It's hectic, it's tiring, and it's a good way to make someone's anxiety worse. When I got my offer letter from a university in Singapore, I was thrilled. When I accepted the letter, I felt guilty. My family isn't all that rich, and I knew that supporting my education wouldn't be an easy task, especially since Singapore is an expensive place to stay at. But I had always wanted to study more, to expand my horizons and experience new things. I couldn't do any of this if I stayed home, and my parents understood that. After applying for scholarships to cover at least part of my tuition, I was packed and ready to go. The biggest problem I faced was finding a place to stay. Since my classes were in the evening and I would only finish by 11 p.m., I needed a place not too far from college. While Singapore is a safe place for girls, my mother didn't want me taking any chances. Then there was my budget. I couldn't afford to stay in an expensive place, and unfortunately my college dorm was full. I would have to find boarding elsewhere. I was searching only for rooms, apartments, honestly any place where I could stay when I came across a website for a dorm for international students. I scrolled through the different rooms and prices they offered, and it was like God had heard my cries. This place was a blessing because not only was it cheap, but it was 2 subway stops from my college. And if I were to share a room with other people, I would actually be saving money. Though I would have to use the communal washroom, but I was completely fine with that. I clicked on the check availability button, and there was exactly 1 triple sharing room vacant. At that time, I thought it was meant to be. A thing I feared when I arrived at the dorm was that it would be nothing like the photos on the website, but as I stepped into my new room, my fear simply vanished. It was big and spacious with 3 beds, 1 in each corner. There were 3 big desks, chairs, and closets that came with lockers. All in all, it was a good place, and I felt like I could stay there for the entirety of my college education. I was so overjoyed that I had found this place that I barely noticed that there was absolutely no one in the halls. Apart from the people who took care of the place, for a 3-story building, I hadn't seen 1 student around. There was an eerie silence that blanketed the dorms, one that I didn't notice in my first day here. My mind was full of so many thoughts, so many things that I still needed to do that I missed all the warning signs. When I first came to Singapore, I made a resolve that I would get my life on track. This meant sleeping early so that I could wake up early. I'm a night owl by nature, so my sleep cycle was a mess. One thing that I intended on fixing. During my first week here, I didn't notice anything strange, but that was mostly because I barely stayed in my room. Though I did realize that my roommates were never really around. They left in the morning and returned in the night. Either they were in the room before 12 a.m. or they didn't come back at all. And they weren't really talkers. After coming back to the room, they would change in a hurry and be in bed as soon as possible. I didn't pay much attention to their jittery actions, the terrified expression on their face when they came back to the room at 11:50 p.m. I wish I did pay attention to them. I wish I paid attention to other strange things that happened all around me. I was so busy exploring Singapore, making friends, and hanging out with them that I didn't realize that no one used the kitchen from 8:21 p.m. to 9:19 p.m. I didn't notice that the fridge had a lock and could not be opened after 11:30 p.m. And because I was trying so hard to sleep early, I didn't realize that no one stepped out of their rooms after 12 a.m. Though sometimes when I woke up in the middle of the night, I could hear people shuffling outside, the lift doors opening and closing over and over again. Ding, ding, ding. They say old habits are hard to break. For a while, I tried my best to fix my sleep cycle, but as classes got hectic, I could feel myself falling back into my usual pattern. When I continued to work on my assignments as my roommates turned in for the night, sometimes I'd find them staring at me confused. They seemed scared of me, and that reaction always seemed so excessive. I didn't even know why they were so worried about me. It's not like they even knew my name. We had never spoken before this, after all. One night, I was actually watching a movie instead of working. My rule of going to bed early had been tossed in the bin. I had evening classes anyway, so it didn't matter if I slept through the morning. It was around 3 a.m. when I got out of bed to use the washroom after having 1 too many sips of Pepsi. The moment I opened the door, I heard the ding of the elevator. When I turned to look at it, I hoped to see another resident of the dorm, someone I could maybe strike up a conversation with. But there was no one there. The doors of the elevator opened, the light inside bright and inviting. The longer the doors stayed open, the more I stared. The more I stared, the more I wanted to step inside. As I waited, not a single soul came by. The doors closed with a ding, and the strange trance I was in finally broke. Damn, I must be really tired. As I continued the journey to the washroom, which wasn't really long since my room was 2 doors away, I felt eyes on me, watching my every move, watching the way my knees bent every time with every step I took, watching as goosebumps came to life across my skin, tiny hairs standing up in attention, watching as I crossed my arms and hunched down as if that would hide me from the invisible stare. I told myself over and over that I was imagining things. The stress from college was just aggravating my anxiety. That had to be it. But when I reached the washroom, my hand reaching to open the door, I heard the sound of someone sobbing. I don't know why I felt the need to turn around. I don't know why, I just had to know who was crying. On any other day, I would mind my business, but today I looked towards the sound and found that the door to one of the rooms was ajar. Inside, on the bed, I could see a boy sitting on the edge and crying, face covered with his hands. He cried and cried, body shaking with every tear he took, but the sound of it was so hollow. It was as if he wasn't really sad. Crying was just another process, a task that he had to complete. Chewing on my lower lip, I was about to turn away when he looked up, making my heart leap into my mouth. His face was normal, so very normal. Fair skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. A sharp nose with a square jaw. Nothing about him was striking yet. When I saw him, I couldn't look away. Despite how generic he looked, the tears that leaked from his eyes were red, so deep like crimson blood. And as his gaze settled on me in seconds, he was on his feet, marching to the door. My first thought was that he was angry that I was invading his privacy. But then, his hand reached, grabbing my wrist instead of the door. Confusion and fear swept over me as I was pulled forward, away from the washroom and into his room. My lips parted to scream, body already twisting and turning, trying to fight my way out of his grasp. It was then that I saw it, a sight so terrifying that it made my blood run cold. The door to the washroom that had been previously closed was now wide open, darkness pooling from its depths. Tendrils stretching out and then pulling back in, pulsating. And in the heart of it all were a pair of eyes, blood red, fixed on me. Their gaze was familiar, as if they had been watching me from the moment I stepped out of my room, as if they had been with me since the day I moved into the dorms. As I was pulled into the room, the darkness that stared at me, the creature that lurked in its depths, smiled, its white teeth sharp and jagged, piercing through the black. Then the boy slammed the door to his room shut. My thoughts ran wild, a storm of emotions building up inside of me. I couldn't make sense of what I had seen. I couldn't make sense of the situation I was in. My heart continued to hammer in my chest because this was far from over. After all, just because I had escaped one danger didn't mean I hadn't stepped into something even more sinister. But when I turned around to face the boy, waiting to see a monstrosity in his place, nothing about him had changed. Only his eyes weren't leaking with red anymore. Still holding onto my hand, anger marred his face, and he shook me and asked. When I left home, I left with dreams, some simple and some too big to be contained in my small body, but all of them connected at one point. They all had one underlying tone: happiness. Singapore was the place where I would start afresh, leave behind my awkward and anxious shell to be someone new. And in my imagination, that always seemed like an easy task. Pulling a fabrication into reality is difficult, sometimes impossible. But I was hopeful. When I got my offer letter, I was sure that good things were coming my way. Of course, that wasn't the case. Everyone needs a reality check, and waking up here in my room day after day with a set of rules taped onto my desk was mine. Hello again. It's Annika. I realized that I never told you my name the last time I sat down to write, but then again, I didn't make a lot of sense last time either. My thoughts, much like my emotions, were a mess, and I pretty much wrote down whatever came to mind. I think a part of me was afraid that if I didn't, everything that I had seen, everything that I had felt would turn out to be a dream, or the delusions of someone teetering on the edge of a horrifying realization. After the first incident and my initial rambling, I decided to take a step back and organize my thoughts. I decided to give myself time to accept my new reality. Though if I have to be honest, sometimes I wish I would wake up and be back home again, safe and sound, far away from this cursed place. But that isn't possible. Do you know it's dangerous to leave your room at night? I never thought a simple question as this could change my life, open my eyes to horrors that I had never seen before. But as I was pulled into the room, pulled away from the monstrosity staring at me through the shadows, everything I knew and understood about the world just faded away. For a while, as the boy with a normal face and tears of blood stared at me with disbelief, my eyes were fixed on the closed door, my mind racing to make sense of what had happened. What I saw, it had to be a trick, right? Maybe I was tired, just so tired that my mind was making up things, scaring me even though there was no reason to be scared. But my heart, it wouldn't stop rattling against my chest, banging against my ribs as though it had been trapped in a prison from which there was no escape. "Are you listening to me?" the boy asked, and I slowly looked up at him. I don't know what I looked like at that moment. I don't know whether I was shaking or crying or on the verge of just passing out. But whatever the boy saw, it was enough to make him calm down, his dark eyes filling up with pity. "Are you okay?" he asked, switching to a much gentler tone. Opening my mouth, I tried to talk to him. I tried to answer his question, but my voice kept giving up on me, hiding away in its box, afraid that if I said too much, everything would be real. Running his fingers through his hair, the boy glanced at the clock, and I wondered if he was planning to throw me out. But then he sighed and looked me straight in the eyes. "I know the rules seem like a bunch of BS, but you can't ignore them," he said, voice rising as he finished. I couldn't understand why he was angry. I couldn't understand why he looked at me as though I had done something wrong. In my head, I tried to remember the lease agreement I had signed, the one that had a bunch of rules about property damage, extensions, and the like. But there was nothing about never leaving the room at night, nothing about creepy elevators or effed up things that lurked in the dark. I stopped talking and took in a deep breath as my fear was slowly replaced by the anger bubbling up inside. "Before you take your frustrations out on me, can you tell me what the F you're talking about?" Confusion flashed through the boy's eyes, his brows furrowing as he stared at me. "I'm talking about the rules," he said, and then took in my expression. "Oh God, no one told you the rules?" "What rules?" I asked, frustrated. "Instead of running around the subject, can you get to the effing point?" Slumping onto his bed, the boy sighed. "Who gave you a tour of the dorm when you first arrived?" "Some guy, though he seemed as lost as I was," I answered, not knowing why that mattered. "I guess that explains it. You got the new guy. He only works during the morning, so he doesn't know a lot about the dorm. Why don't you have a seat?" he suggested, motioning to the empty bed across from his. Feeling uneasy, I did as I was asked. Any other day I would have bolted out the door, but today I was too afraid to step out. Too afraid to see that thing again. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Jake, and I've been in this place for roughly a year," the boy said, holding out his hand, but when I didn't shake it, he just shrugged and let it fall. "After tonight, I'm sure you've noticed that this place isn't exactly normal. It's cheap, it's comfortable, but it's not safe unless you follow a certain set of rules." As Jake spoke, I could feel dread settle down in the pit of my stomach, anxiety gnawed on my insides, spreading through my bloodstream like an infection that made it hard to breathe. Grabbing a sheet of paper from his desk, Jake handed it to me. With my fingers trembling, I began to read, feeling my heart sink with every rule. Rule 1. Never enter the kitchen on the 4th floor, 8:21 p.m. to 9:19 p.m. If you do, leave a bit of whatever it is you're taking on the counter. Always keep your eyes down, and no matter what you hear, do not look up. The voices might get desperate, they might get sad, they might even get threatening, but do not look up. Take what you need and leave. Rule 2. With regards to the first rule, the caretakers lock the fridge around 10 p.m. If you need to take something, do it before then. Do not try to open the fridge after 11:30 p.m., especially if you don't have a key. If you try to break the lock, you might be seen as an intruder. The dorm does not like intruders. Rule 3. Avoid the second floor corridor from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Samara likes to walk during that time. While she likes the company, she won't let you go until it's after 12, and by then it will be too late. Rule 4. On Sundays, the front desk is closed. There is no one in the office on Sundays, no matter what the time. Please always remember that. If you do find the office door open, it is best you leave. Do not approach the office. Do not attempt to close the door. Aaron does not like disturbances. Rule 5. Sometimes on Sundays you might find a girl sitting at the front desk, one with dyed blonde hair and glasses. You can approach her. That's Abby. She's helpful and kind. If you have any worries, any problems of the darker nature that need solving, she might have the answers you seek. Rule 6. Do not attempt to stay in someone else's room for the night. Benjamin, the monitor, roams the halls at night and will continue to knock on the door until you return to your own room. He might be a tad annoying, but he is mostly harmless. Rule 7. If at any point you hear music while you're in the rec room, stay still. Don't panic, don't run, just stay still and listen. Once the song ends, clap. Do not forget to clap. After that, you may leave. Aiden appreciates people who hear him out. If you're a good listener, he might reward you. Rule 8. No matter what happens, do not leave your room at night. From 12 a.m. till sunrise, the dorm is open to hostile creatures. It is their time to roam freely, and anyone out during this time is fair game. If you do make the mistake of leaving, find Benjamin. He can lead you to safety. If you cannot find him, enter the elevator. While the creatures will continue to call it to every floor and try to lure you out, as long as you stay inside, you will be safe. If not, you might end up added to the rules. As I read one rule after the other, I could feel my blood turn cold, going over every line over and over again. If someone had told me all of this before tonight, I would have laughed. But after seeing what I did today, it took everything I had to not burst into tears. The rules seemed so casual, giving names to dangerous entities, and until I reached the end, I couldn't understand why they would feel the need to do so. But the last line, it made all of the pieces fall into place. You might end up added to the rules. This could only mean that every person mentioned in the rules, Samara, Abby, Aiden, Benjamin, and God knows who else, they were once residents of this hostel. They were once people with normal lives, people like me trying to make something out of themselves. But now, I don't know what they were. I don't know where they went. Did they die here? Is that why they continued to haunt it? Or were they just swallowed whole, never having the chance to escape? And as I looked up at Jake, questions filling my head, there was a subtle knock on the door. It was so low, so gentle, that if silence hadn't been hanging over the room like a noose, I would have never heard it. My breath caught in my throat and Jake stared at me, his eyes asking a question I couldn't answer. He wanted to know if I wanted to leave with Benjamin. While the rules did say Benjamin would help me, that he could keep me safe right now, I couldn't believe anything. I could only sit in my place, frozen, every tick of the clock raising the fear I felt. Then the knock came again, and again, and again, the intensity increasing with each try. Soon the door was rattling and the tears I had been holding back were slipping out of my eyes. I wanted this to be over. I wanted to wake up. Getting up, Jake grabbed a pair of earphones connected to an iPod and handed them to me. Then he lay down in his bed and turned away, falling asleep as though the sound of the knocks, the shaking of the door, none of it bothered him. He had been here long enough to experience everything. He had been here long enough to not be afraid. Plugging in the earphones, I switched on the iPod and closed my eyes as a random song began to play, its sound barely drowning out the knocking. Unlike Jake, I sat on the bed, shivering and scared until the knocking finally stopped, until the sun finally rose. I've really got to give it to some of these folks writing these stories. They've got some talent. The descriptive sentences in this story were pretty dang great and really painted a creepy picture. And the addition that most of these rules were because of people who previously didn't follow the rules is a great touch. It really makes me want to read more about this, a whole novella perhaps about this creepy dorm. And hey, if one of these stories is good enough to make me want to read more, that's overall high praise. Love it. Now let's get a little more critical. After all, I'm an English major dropout, so let's put that unfinished degree to use. I love how the story slowly builds up, giving some good background to the character, what they were trying to accomplish being here, and their failing to not stay up late, slowly leading to realizing something was up with the dorm. And while this thing reads like the first couple chapters of a full story, if that were the case, I would love even more time to be taken setting things up. Hint at more stuff with the freaked out roommates, weird occurrences in the dorm, stuff like that. We get a little, but the shift into the creepiness is still pretty sudden. Second, the bloody tears, what's up with those? And third, take just a little more time with those creepy moments. There was some solid lead up to them, but then when a creepy thing happens, if it were to go just a little slower, it would really amp things up. Anyway, love the story, and I want to see more. And hey, folks watching this, if you have a story you want to share, Why not let me know in the comments? Until next time, please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.